Once two monks were traveling together when they came upon a woman afraid to cross a rushing river. Despite their vows not to look at or touch women, one of the monks lifted her up and carried her to the other side of the stream. He set her down, and the two monks continued along the road. After 6 hours of silence, his companion could no longer contain his anger. "How could you break our vows and carry that woman?" he asked. The first monk replied, "I put her down 6 hours ago, but I see that you are still carrying her." Today we read from the last Parshat of Genesis, Vayechi. In this portion, Jacob blesses all of his children, including his grandsons Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob dies and is buried by all of his children in Hebron, in the cave of the field of Machpelah in the land of Canaan. Joseph then assures his brothers that he has moved on. The book concludes with Joseph telling his brothers that God will return them to the promised land, and the children of Israel promised Joseph they will return his bones to the family burial plot when they leave Egypt. After burying Jacob, the brothers were worried that Joseph may still hold a grudge. After all, the brothers threw Joseph into a pit and first left him to die before selling him off as a slave. The brothers held onto this guilt for over 20 years. And if Joseph was going to hold a grudge, being thrown into a pit and left to die would be a good reason. The brothers feared that Joseph would take revenge on them. And yet, the rabbis refute this assumption, explaining that Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him, because he was saddened by the brothers' inability to see that what had happened at the pit 20 years earlier was bashert, designed by God, and thus meant to be. The brothers were unable to move on with their lives. They were slaves to a terrible memory they believed that Joseph shared. And yet, Joseph had it in him to move on from this event that happened in all of their lives. He reassures them that what they did in the end turned out okay, and he promises that he will take care of them. By the time they buried Jacob, there was a reconciliation between the brothers. While Jacob and Esau reconciled, they each went in their own direction, never to meet again. But here, the brothers reconcile and remain together as a family, something we haven't seen yet in the Torah. Most of the time when we see family relationships in the Torah, we see fractures and anger. Years of estrangement also occur. Through Joseph and his brothers, we see evidence that not every relationship in the Torah is fraught or against each other. The brothers chose to make peace with each other, even if full forgiveness wasn't given. And we see through Ephraim and Manasseh that two brothers in the Torah can get along from the beginning of birth. Relationships, especially familial relationships, are not always so easy. Last night, I spoke of the unconditional love that we give to our children when we bless them every Friday night. And yet, in some cases, we have seen that there can be a fracture in the relationship, whether between parent and child or between siblings. The examples we see in the Torah are not always good ones, and yet we can still learn from them. What we don't see in this ending with Joseph and his brothers is atonement and apology. We just see a moving on, an acceptance that one doesn't have to carry on the pain of the past. Joseph seems to understand how destructive to himself holding a grudge would be, and in that regard, he chose to move on. His brothers, in the meantime, held the guilt for what they did to Joseph for 20 years. Joseph saw what they did to him as bashert, something he saw coming through God. In the same way, it must have been bashert that the brothers had to travel to Egypt to get food during the famine and to come face to face with their brother. While we only know that Joseph's brothers continued to feel this guilt for their past actions, perhaps this was the moment in which Joseph became the symbol of an older brother, guiding them into letting go of this weight that they had been carrying. We also know that Jacob was unaware that his sons were reconciling, but as I have seen too many times, someone who is at their deathbed often waits until loved ones come together before they take their last breaths. Though their reunion was not perfect, each of them is strengthened knowing that they have it within themselves to put their differences aside and to function together. Only then were they truly able to be the tribes of Israel. We then end the book of Genesis with the words, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, and we will be strengthened. Or sometimes translated as, we should go from strength to strength. Joseph and his brothers found the strength to move on. As we begin this secular year of 2025, may we all find our strength to let go of grudges, and may we be strengthened to move forward in all of our endeavors. Shabbat Shalom.